Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the zodiac sign of Libra for the entire year of 2025. So, in this forecast, it's mainly designed for people that have either their sun sign in Libra or their rising sign in Libra. And I'm going to give a big picture overview of some of the major trends and themes that you can expect over the course of the next 12 months. So let's jump right into it. So here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they get by the end of the year, which helps to show where some of the major activity is taking place in your birth chart over the course of the next year. So these are some of the main transits I'm going to focus on during the course of this workshop, basically, or during the course of this forecast. And then here's some major dates that I'm not going to mention all of the dates, but you can refer back to this slide in order to get a sense for the time frames of some of the things that I've talked about. All right, so let's start with the first major transit I want to talk about at the beginning of the year, which is the Mars retrograde, which is taking place in your 11th house of friends and your 10th house of career. So this Mars retrograde just began in December when Mars stationed retrograde in the sign of Leo, which is your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. And this is kind of tricky because Mars retrograde in the 11th house can indicate that there's some conflict or strife or difficulties that are arising with friends and groups at this time in your life. So sometimes there can be fights with friends, or there could be certain friendships that come to an end during this time, either externally as a result of their choice, or sometimes internally if you feel like your friends aren't really helping you out or aren't really being good friends to you for some reason. So this is mainly something that's happening in December and just the first few days of 2025, but I wanted to mention it because it's part of the energy of the beginning of the year. And what happens is that Mars starts in your 11th house of friends at the beginning of January, and then it retrogrades back into your 10th house of career, where it's going to spend the first 4 months of 2025. So having Mars retrograde and transiting your 10th house of career can sometimes bring up some challenges and some issues pertaining to strife or difficulties when it comes to career matters for you at this time. So there may be some obstacles that arise that are frustrating or make you angry, or in some instances you may decide that you have to separate or cut something out of your life entirely that you've been doing up to this point. So sometimes people get frustrated and they quit their job, for example, in order to pursue another line of work. So whatever you do, it's just a good idea to do it deliberately, because sometimes when you get into a conflict during this time, if you say something without thinking it through, you may find that it ends up having a bigger long-term impact than you anticipate at first. So that's something you want to be a little bit careful about. There may also be a process of reviewing and revising and sort of internalizing things in order to make some choices about where you want to go moving forward. So for some of you with night charts, I think this is going to be a more constructive transit where it may just be an important turning point in your career where you have to take decisive action, or where you'll have to choose one course of action or another. But when you look back on it in retrospect, you're going to realize that this was a huge turning point for you when you opened up a new chapter of your life when it comes to your career and your overall life direction. So it should be quite positive and quite constructive. And in fact, so that transit's happening in the first 4 months of the year, and there can be some challenges that come along with it. But then in the second half of the year, starting in June, the planet Jupiter is actually going to move into your 10th house of career, where it's going to stay for the entirety of the second half of 2025 and all the way into the first half of 2026. And this is actually an extremely positive and optimistic transit when it comes to matters surrounding your career and your overall life direction. So the way I'm interpreting this is I think that even if Mars kicks up some dust in the first 4 months of the year and causes you some difficulties, or you have to make some difficult decisions, I think that the choice that you make towards the beginning of the year is going to pay off and be worth it, because then in the entire second half of the year, you're having this extremely positive career transit that generally indicates success in whatever you're attempting to do at this time. So sometimes people can land a new job that goes really well. Other times they can get a promotion. In other instances, people can achieve career success or recognition for things that they've done in the past up to that point. So generally, it just seems like a very positive and optimistic time for career matters in the second half of the year. So that's something to look forward to. Moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is the last eclipse is taking place in your 7th house of relationships in the spring around the March-April timeframe. And in fact, we've got a lot of activity happening in your 7th house of relationships during the first and second quarter around the springtime of this year, especially around the March-April timeframe. So the most important thing is, over the past year, there's been a series of eclipses that have been bouncing back and forth between your 1st house of self and your 7th house of relationships. And you've probably gone through some major changes during that time when it comes to better balancing what you want and who you are and what your identity and sense of selfhood is, which can include things like your orientation towards your body, your appearance, and other things like that. You've probably been trying to balance things out in terms of what you need versus what you need from relationships, which is the 7th house. And this is usually a period of major beginnings and major endings when it comes to relationships. And I think that's going to be the main keyword for you here when we have this final eclipse that's going to take place in the relationship sector of your chart around the March-April timeframe. So one of the things that goes along with that is that the planets Saturn and Neptune are going to be moving into your 7th house of relationships during the middle part of this year, where Saturn's going to depart from Pisces, which is positive. That's a transit you've been having for a couple of years that sometimes can lead to greater challenges when it comes to work and health. And you've also had Neptune transiting through your 6th house of work and health, which can sometimes bring up kind of like nebulous health issues or make your work situation a little bit unclear. And both of those planets are going to move into your 7th house of relationships not too long after, around the time of that Aries eclipse that's indicating major beginnings and major endings in the relationship sector of your chart. So with Saturn going into your 7th house, you may go through a period of restructuring of relationships over the course of the next few years. And 2025, especially the middle part of it, is going to be an early preview of that restructuring process. So sometimes during the process of that restructuring, there can be relationships that cool off or become more distant during this time. In some instances, your partner could be dealing with some issues themselves if you have a partner, and therefore it's being reflected in your chart that they're sort of like going through some stuff. Other times, since Neptune is also going in there into your 7th house at the same time with Saturn, there may be some issues surrounding a lack of clarity in relationships in your life, or having some tensions when it comes to boundaries in relationships. So Saturn, on the one hand, is going to pull you in one direction when it comes to relationships, where it's going to try to be pulling you in the direction of being more realistic and being more clear about relationships, sometimes to the point of like pessimism or being overly negative or even critical when it comes to relationships. Whereas Neptune, that's going to go in there at the same time, is going to be pulling you in the opposite direction of being very idealistic about relationships, sometimes to the point of going too far and maybe not having a clear picture about where you stand with relationships or with other people. So I think trying to resolve those tensions and those two very different energies that are pulling you in different directions with relationships is going to be a major theme, especially in the middle part of 2025, when Saturn and Neptune come into their closest alignment in your 7th house. But ultimately, it'll be good to pay attention to that just because it's opening up a sequence of events and some longer term transits that are going to play out over the next few years. All right, so one last thing that goes along with that, if that wasn't enough 7th house activity, is that Venus in the springtime around the time that all this other stuff is happening, Venus is going to go retrograde in your 7th house as well. And Venus is going to start retrograde in your 7th house in Aries, and it's going to retrograde back into your 6th house of work and health. So on the one hand, this is giving us a little bit more information about what's going on in the relationship sector of your chart at this time, where there may be a process of reviewing old or current relationships that you go through in the springtime when Venus goes retrograde in your 7th house. So for some people, this can mean that there's old relationships from the past that come back into the present. And so you have this question sometimes of like getting together with somebody from your past. In other instances, when that happens, it can be about reviewing these past relationships, but not necessarily getting together with that person again, but instead just thinking about your past and reflecting on how far you've come and trying to make a decision about where you want to go with relationships in the future. So this process of reflection and reviewing should be very prominent for you in the springtime, in the early part of 2025. And for some reason, Venus is going to retrograde back into your 6th house of work and health. So sometimes this may connect those topics. So there could be something involving relationships that's actually tied into your work or your job. Obviously, you want to be careful about that, since sometimes blurring the boundaries between like work versus relationships can be tricky and can be dicey, and you could get yourself into a little bit of trouble there. But obviously, everybody's situation is different and it can go different ways. With Venus retrograde in your 6th house, it may also be a time of reviewing your health and reviewing different things related to your health and what it takes to take care of yourself in terms of your body and your physical vitality. So going in for checkups or other things like that can be good, just to make sure you're doing things to take care of yourself and maintain an overall sense of health. And as long as you do that around this time, that can actually be a very positive transit where you make great headway in that area of your life. Especially with Saturn starting to move out of your 6th house this year, I think that's actually a very positive transit and could indicate an improved period of health, or something that you can do to improve your health after a period that's been a little bit more tricky for health matters over the course of the past couple of years, since Saturn went into your 6th house in March of 2023. All right, so that brings us to the next thing, which is actually related, which is that the eclipses are shifting into your 6th house and your 12th house axis, which is indicating a period of major beginnings and major endings when it comes to health, both physical health as well as mental health, but also with respect to your work and your workplace in general and whatever it is that you do for work. So we've been talking about health, and when the 6th and 12th house axis is activated, one of the things that it typically does is it shows you the interrelationship between physical health and mental health, which sometimes seem like they're opposite things that aren't related. But I think during this time, seeing the interrelationship between those two and how one can affect the other, especially if something is out of whack, can become more prominent at this time. So it may be a good time then to take advantage of that energy of new beginnings in order to start a new diet or exercise regime, in order to potentially like start seeing a therapist or working on your mental health, and just anything you can do proactively to take care of yourself, both in terms of your body and your mind, would be good things to do at this time as eclipses shift into that axis. So I think this is especially going to be important for you later in the year during the fall, because that's when we're going to see those eclipses take place fully for the first time in your 6th and 12th house axis in the September timeframe. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to mention, well, no, I mentioned health, I didn't mention work. Sometimes people, major beginnings and endings with respect to work, that can mean like quitting one job and starting a new job, or some combination of that. Or it may be that within your current work, you start a new chapter. in terms of that, of having a major beginning or major ending, like getting a promotion or having a change in terms of your workplace and the people that you work with. Or the sixth house can also be people that work for you. So if you find yourself in some sort of managerial position or where you're having to hire people to work with, even to do simple things like work on your home or something like that, you could have a significant event that takes place that marks a new beginning or ending when it comes to that topic. All right, so that's it for the eclipses. I want to move into talking about the last transit that's happening this year, which is that the planet Uranus is moving into your ninth house of education and religion and philosophy and beliefs. And this is going to represent the beginning of a major long-term transit over the course of the next 7 years that's going to shake up and really change what your outlook is about the world and what your belief system is. So Uranus is the planet of sudden changes, of revolutions, of very quick developments that happen somewhat suddenly or unexpectedly. And this is starting in the second half of the year, the entire second half of the year, starting in July. Uranus is going to go into this sector of your chart that has to do with what you believe, what your education is, and what you think about the world, like what your personal philosophy and politics and other things, your sense of morality, all of that lives in the ninth house, and all of that is coming up for some sort of major shakeup in the second half of 2025. So this can be a very exciting time because we can be exposed to sometimes like a different culture or a different set of belief systems that's unique to us in some way that really changes our outlook and our perspective on life. And sometimes we can get really excited about that. Sometimes we can move kind of fast. So you may want to exercise a little bit of caution here because from an outside standpoint, other people may see you as going through this really rapid change in terms of your belief systems or in terms of your outlook on life. And that could be a little bit jarring for people around you, even if subjectively for you, it's very exciting and very liberating. Having these feelings of like liberation over a new set of beliefs is a really common experience with this transit. But I guess just be careful to take it easy when it comes to people around you who may not be experiencing a similar transit and may be wanting to move at a slower pace if they're able to accompany you on that journey. All right, so that transit's happening starting in July. It's the beginning, it's like a preview of a longer 7-year transit. So it's not necessarily all going to happen at once, but I do think that in the second half of 2025, you're going to start getting a preview of what that 7-year transit's going to be like. So pay attention to changes that start happening in your life at that time, especially in that sector, because they could end up having much bigger long-term implications than you realize at the start when things first start changing. But it's a very exciting transit. So congratulations on starting that. And I look forward to seeing and hearing how it goes. All right, I think that's it in terms of major transits I wanted to cover for 2025. So this is a big picture overview of some of the major themes coming up during the course of this year, both challenging ones as well as positive ones. I also just released my 2025 electional astrology report a few days ago, where I go through the year and I pick out the best dates for taking actions during the course of 2025 using the principles of electional astrology. So this is really helpful, and people have used my past year's reports to do major things like getting married, launching a business, going on a major journey, or other things like that. So it's super useful and super practical if you're trying to plan things in the long term over the next 12 months and picking the luckiest or most fortunate dates to do that. So the report is I launched the report with a 20% off sale that goes through the first week of January, and you can get it now for that discounted price at theastrologypodcast.com/2025 report. All right, that's it for this forecast. So good luck in 2025, and I'll see you again next year to talk about the horoscopes for 2026. So good luck. I just released my 2025 astrology calendar posters, which show all of the major astrological transits this year at a glance, and you can get those at theastrologypodcast.com/merch. If you want to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I teach an online course in ancient astrology called the Hellenistic Astrology course, which has hundreds of hours of video lectures where I teach people how to read birth charts and how to understand and predict the future using transits and other timing techniques. So you can find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. Also, shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in May of 2025 in Seattle, Washington, and it's being simultaneously streamed online at the same time. So you can find out more information at norwac.net. Finally, thanks to the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon. You can get early access to new episodes plus other bonus content by becoming a patron at patreon.com/astrologypodcast.